Welcome, Model FA's David DeSell here, CEO of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. And I am joined today by Gary Sirak, who is actually an introduction from someone who is recently on our podcast, Joe Jordan. And if you have not yet had a chance to listen to Joe's episode, be sure to go and check that out once you're done this one. But Gary has been an advisor for a number of years, but particularly we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the book that he has written, and we are going to unpack that and share with you how you can weave this into your process as an advisor as well. And the book is called How to Retire and Not Die. So we're going to learn about the idea of this book, where it came from, and how Gary uses it inside of his practice. But before we get there, let's first welcome Gary to the show. Gary, appreciate you joining.
Oh, glad to be here. Looking forward to it, David.
Now, let's sort of start off by connecting some of the dots. So, Joe Jordan, I remember back when I was an advisor, he was on the main stage at our big company conference, and then I had an opportunity to get together with him for the podcast and spend some one-on-one time. And afterwards, he was like, "Hey, you have to talk to Gary and have him on the show. Can I make an introduction?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." But how do you and Joe know each other?
Well, it's a strange world. I was doing a little bit of business with a company, and one of the individuals in that company read my book and happened to be at a function that Joe Jordan was at speaking. And after the function, he walked up to Joe and said, "You need a copy of this guy's book. It's just what you were talking about." And he said, "I think once you read it, you're going to be very glad that you did." So Joe got my book, read it, and then reached out to me and called me on the phone and said, "Hey, my name's Joe Jordan." And I said, "Great. I don't know who you are." And so we went through all that, and it turns out 3 years now, he and I have been really working together because he promotes, his side of the world. I promote mine, and he's just been a wonderful. He's been amazing to help me get my word out, and I have nothing but a huge amount of respect for Joe on many levels. Actually, had dinner with him in Columbus a few months ago, and a charming, charming man. And boy, does he know what the hell he's doing in the industry. He was a fountain of knowledge, things I never had heard of. He was telling me, and I just was blown away by the night. It was really cool.
Love it. Well, I'm glad that he brought us together. And to help set the stage, Gary, walk us through how you got into the industry in the first place. If I'm not mistaken, from our first call that we had, I think it was your dad who had first introduced you, but walk us through how that all came about.
Um, Kind of amazing. My father started my father started in our business in 1957, and I basically joined him in because I really couldn't figure out what I wanted to do in my life. I went and worked for someone else for about 5 years after college. And the long and the short of it is, it just wasn't all that fulfilling or fun. And so I said, okay, I've got to figure something out for the rest of my life. And so, oddly enough, it all happened on a golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida. I was playing golf with one of his friends, and his friend said to me, "Why aren't you in the insurance business?" And I said, "Why do you ask?" He said, "Well, your father could really help, and he's a great teacher, and I think you'd be really good at this." And that was at the 9. And I said, "Okay." I never hit a decent shot the next 9 holes. I had never thought about it. And so that night at dinner, my wife and I went to dinner with my dad and my mom. And at dinner, I said to my dad, out of nowhere, I said, Dad, I think I'm going to join the life insurance business." He literally dropped his wine glass on the table. He was stunned, and it kind of went everywhere. It was a mess, but he just looked at me and says, "What?" And he said, "How?" And he had no idea. So anyway, long story short, that's how I got into business.
And so what year did you start?
79.
79. So let
Yeah,
me put
1979. Yeah.
so
I know I don't look that old.
2024 minus 1979. You have been in the business for 45 years.
Yeah, I really have. I just don't look that old, but I really am. So
Does it feel like 45 years, or do you feel like you blinked and it flew by?
some days it feels like 45, some days it feels like I blinked. It just depends what the day is like. Yeah. It comes and goes. So
What were thinking back to, or actually before we get into this, what did you do for the 5 years after school before entering into the industry?
uh, I got out of college and I was pretty much an English major, which makes me unemployable. So a friend of my father's, and I call it a mercy hire. He literally hired me to sell waxes and polishes, reconditioning supplies for his auto parts company. And he paid me $100 a week, which is kind of interesting in itself. And I went on the road selling stuff that I had no idea what it was, or I'd never waxed a car in my life. It was very interesting. Did that for 5 years and turned this business from nothing into about a $350,000 business. But I was bored to death and I just felt like I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I got so tired of it that I finally said, I just can't do this anymore. So I turned in my notice and went to work selling life insurance.
Well, as an English major, it may have taken you 40 years, but you finally put it to work with your book.
Well, first, yeah, that's very, yeah, we did get the book involved and written 3 of them actually, which is fun. And actually I never thought I'd write a book, but it's kind of amazing that I've written 3. So kind of cool.
That's awesome. Now, as you were building your business over that 45-year time frame, I'm curious to know when the idea of the book came about and kind of what spawned it, because you probably had hundreds or thousands of meetings where you started to notice a common theme in the people that you were meeting with, that then sort of generated this idea. And again, the name of the book is How to Retire and Not Die, the 3 Ps that will keep you young. And we'll certainly go into each of those Ps here, but where'd the idea come from, and why do you think it came about?
Well, the very original time I ever heard or thought about this concept happened when I was very early in the business. And I remember sitting in my office and my dad walked over and said, "Hey, I'm going to have lunch with some friends. I think you should come with me." I said, "Okay." Hop in the car. We drive to downtown Canton, Ohio, where I live. And we are, I'm saying, "Okay, where are we going?" I said, "We're going to go to," his name was Bruno, Bruno's club. And I said, "Oh, Bruno has a club." He said, "Yeah." So we pull into this driveway downtown Canton. Looks like a house. We walk in and there are people there that are no one except Bruno, his wife Betty, and my dad and myself. And we go into this dining room and it turns out Bruno's club is for Bruno. He's the only member. And he has these wonderful cooks in there and they start bringing out Italian food. And I have never had better Italian food in my entire life. I had, at least at that point. And I'm not sure I've had better anyway, but it was amazing. It was just a feast. Well, the reason we were there is because Bruno had sold his company for like $10 million, which is a lot of money back then. He had developed this company. He was a real close friend of my father's. They grew up together as kids. He knew Betty really well. And this is all he did his whole life, but he developed the part that all 3 automakers bought. And so he had this amazing, whatever he invented, and he sold a lot of it. And when it came time, he decided to sell his company. And my dad was there to help consult with him and talk to him. And I remember they were talking, and my dad asked Bruno what he was going to do because Bruno spent his whole life working in this company. That's what he did 7 days a week. Had a bunch of kids. And when he wasn't doing that, he was with the kids, but mostly that's what he did. And Bruno said, "Oh, that's simple. Betty and I are going to go to Italy for a month." And Dad said, "That's wonderful. When you get back from the Italy, what are you going to do with the rest of your life?" And Bruno looked at my dad and says, "Hey, Stan, I got $10 million to figure it out. I'll figure it out." And my dad looked at Betty and she was kind of shaking her head. I'm pretty much eating tiramisu at that time. But anyway, I'm just listening as a young, observer. And the meeting ends and we get in the car and my dad is really quiet. And I said, boy, Dad, that was an amazing meal. And that was a great meeting. And my dad said, that was not a good meeting, Gary. I said, well, the food was good. He said, yeah, I didn't really get into the food. He said, I was concerned about what Bruno said. And I said, what's that? He said, Bruno doesn't have a plan. And Bruno's done this his whole life. And if Bruno doesn't have a plan, the problem is we're going to end up having to be at a funeral within a couple of years. And I said, Dad, what are you talking about? He said, Gary, you can't do what Bruno's done and retire to nothing. He's got to retire to something. And I listened. And a year later, we went to Bruno's funeral. My dad was 100% right. And Bruno was a healthy guy until he wasn't doing anything. And then all of a sudden he wasn't healthy. And that really landed. And that was the beginning of my thought process for this book. And then you mentioned, all those years of clients. I've just seen so many people check out way too early because they just didn't have this figured out.
So I have, are you familiar with the SEPA designation, Certified Exit Planning Advisor? So I have that designation, and it's to help increase the valuation of companies before they go to exit, like Bruno had done. And in part of that process, you need to figure out, is the business ready to exit? Financially, are you prepared to exit? Emotionally, are you prepared to exit? And determining what they call your third act is. So your first act is, growing up. Your second act is building your business. And your third act is, quote unquote, retirement. And the stat, which is directly in alignment with, what you're alluding to here, is that 70% of small business owners, when they sell their business, they regret that decision because they realize that that's basically all they've ever known. And the idea of, Coronas and cocktails on the beach is fun for about 4, maybe 5 days. And then all of a sudden, you're like, crap, what am I doing with my life? And I can see why you and Joe Jordan get along, because one of the things that he talked about, which you used similar language a moment ago, which is retiring to something as opposed to retiring from something. So I 100% agree with you. And I've seen people in my life wither away rather quickly. And I've seen also people in my life that have sort of, they exude this newfound energy in retirement because they're doing something that fulfills them. So I guess all that to say, obviously I agree with what you're saying, but I'm curious to know maybe some examples of like what people retire to that you've seen where they've really flourished and have shown their happiness in doing so.
Well, great question too. And I think about this a lot because I have a lot of people that are really happy being retired. And I just had 2 in this afternoon, actually, and both of them were very thrilled. But what they both did that I really kind of encouraged them was to work part-time. I said, I don't want you to retire cold because you've never had this many hours available. You need to work somewhat so you can then figure out your spare time, what really does, get you excited, get you up in the morning and moving. And both of them took that to heart, and both of them went part-time. And it's just funny. They were both here today telling me how nice it is not working full-time, but working part-time and giving them time to really figure out the 2-part. So I think that's really important. But I'll give you a great example. One of my clients bought a motorhome and they decided they were going to travel. So they have traveled the country in their motorhome. And I happened to be in it last week. They were in town and they said, here, you got to check this out. I haven't been in a motorhome in like 35, 40 years. I had no idea how nice they were. This thing is, like 2 lounge chairs, full-size TV, kitchen. I said, what in the world? Anyway, it was, and then it spread out. I don't know. It was really pretty awesome. But we had a real nice conversation. And And they showed me, and then they showed me a map of all the places they've been. Outrageous. And they were so happy doing that. And they made all kinds of friends on the road. And so that's a great example. And then I have some other people that just are really into helping other people and really trying to commit to other things than themselves. And that's kind of fun to watch them too. I had a truck driver. He was a trucker. He went cross country all the time and very social guy. He was always on the phone talking to people, whatever, when he's on the road. Well, he comes off the road finally, just can't do that long haul stuff anymore. And I see him and he's really bored to death and I'm worried about him. And I said, you need to find something to do. He said, I don't know what to do. I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, you still like driving? He said, I love to drive. I just can't do that cross country stuff. I said, I have a shorter trip for you. He said, what's that? I said, I want you to call Meals on Wheels. He said, why? I said, because Meals on Wheels needs to deliver food to people who can't get out of their house to get food. And he said, I'm not aware of this. I said, well, look it up. I think you might really like this. So sure enough, he does that. And I've seen him a number of times since then. And he said, Gary said, I'm delivering meals to these women who, and it's all women, by the way, who can't get out. And he said, I've got like 15 really brand new friends and they look forward to me. He said, I'm their only social interaction. He said, this is really pretty amazing. So he's really excited. And he said, this is like one of the best things I've ever done in my life. He said, I just feel so fulfilled, which, I think that's pretty awesome.
I love that. And, I'll weave in a joke, but if people are fortunate to be married after all those years when they get to retirement, I would imagine too that they have this realization that when they said I do, they really said I do to mornings, evenings, and weekends. And when they find themselves together 24/7, that may pose a challenge in and of itself.
Hot button, David, hot button. Yeah, I will give you a good story. So I have a friend of mine who's my Uber driver. He basically drives for me. And I asked him one time, I said, so what's it like? He said, well, I really realized that, I said, how did you come about this? He said, well, my wife found it for me. I said, oh, that's telling. He said, yeah, she kind of said, I'm sort of sick of seeing you. I think I'm going to find you a job. He said, all right. Next thing you know, he's driving Uber. He's really happy and he likes it. But it's pretty funny. She made him get a job. And then she did everything. And she said, okay, you go to work today. And he said, what? And she set the whole thing up.
That's funny. Well, it's interesting because you shared part-time work. That part-time work, like the Meals on Wheels, had sort of a fulfilling nature to it. But then also you mentioned the couple that that travel around the country in their motorhome. And what I'm gathering from you in some of those examples is it's maybe not so much as you need to get a job in retirement, but rather have a plan in retirement, because you go from this structured life for 30, 40, however many years, to then you wake up and have nothing to do. I feel like that's what causes you to start withering away. Whereas if you had a plan of what that day entailed, you're that much more likely to retire and not die right away anyways.
I think 100% you hit it. And it's really kind of fascinating because one of my clients who's no longer living, she was working for a very large bank. She had a huge job and she was very, very, very successful. Well, their retirement thing was age 65. And so she called me up and said, hey, we need to get together. And she had a lot of money. She was like really well set. And I said, great. So we meet and we have dinner, her and her husband and my wife and I, and almost never do business at those things. But she started asking questions. So I started answering them. And what I realized is she had zero plan, none. And she had about a year to figure this out. And she was nowhere near it. And she retired at age 65. That day, the Cleveland Clinic called her and told her that she needed to come in immediately. She had had tests. She had pancreatic cancer and she was gone within 6 months. And And I really can't imagine. I mean, she was so healthy before that. She had passed every physical ever. And I just looked and said, she just didn't have a life. She had no idea what she was really going to do. And that's what I think happened here. And it was just incredibly sad. Yeah, I just watched that occur and said, there's something really missing in this puzzle. And that is, you better have that plan figured out. And I just think you got to have purpose. You got to have passion. You got to have a plan.
Something tells me that has to do with the three P's, which we'll unpack. But speaking of purpose, my grandmother who passed like a year and a half ago ish now. Um, it was interesting. So she worked, gosh, till her early 80s as like a secretary at a law firm. And everyone was always like, wow, Mary is so like spunky and lively. And during those years that she was working, she went to all of our sporting games, whether they were local or not, graduations, of course, hosted holidays. Like she was like just always on her toes, so to speak. And then she retired and she was just like in her rocking chair doing crossword puzzles and watching the boob tube all day and started sort of like then aging, right? And then what happened, because she didn't have a plan, um, and we were all done sports, so that she didn't have like that purpose that she had. But then my cousin Crystal had a baby, so my niece, and then all of a sudden Grammy was alive again, and what ended up taking her out was she fell in the kitchen and had to get surgery, and then got septic and passed away shortly thereafter. But what was interesting, which I never thought about it until this conversation, is she didn't have a plan. She lost the purpose. She started withering away. Her purpose was reignited with her great grandchild. Um, and then an unfortunate circumstance that, ended up causing her to pass away. But when she got that purpose back, it was amazing to see how much life she had back in her. So I don't know what sort of response I'm looking for. It was more of a realization that I just talked through on my end, with the personal experience.
Well, I do want to bring up, you brought up TV. I have an interesting one. This happened a number of years ago. A client of mine, he was the national sales manager for a company, traveled all over the country and did really, really well. Plenty of money, all that kind of good stuff. And he and his wife came in to see me and we're having a conversation. And he said, Gary, I'm going to retire. And he said, I want you to look I looked everything over. He was fine. I mean, there was way more cash and he was great. And I said, okay. I said, so let me ask you my favorite question. Tell me about your first day, your first week, your first month, your first year of retirement. And he looks at me and says, Gary, I have it all figured out. I said, that is cool. I said, so few people really have that. I am impressed. What does that look like? He said, well, I've been on the road so many years and I've always wanted to watch a TV program called NCIS, but I never had a chance to watch it. And I started laughing. And he said, oh, I'm not kidding. I look at his wife and she's kind of shaking her head. But he said, Gary, there's 947 episodes. And he said, and I'm going to watch them all. And I looked at him and I said, okay. And he said, and I am serious. He said, this is what I'm into. He said, after that, I'll figure out what I want to do next. He said, but this is my first priority. So another thing I should tell you about this guy, he was an excellent baker. Somewhere in life, someone gave him a recipe, family, somehow, for chocolate chip cookies. And once in a while, he would bring some into the office and they would be inhaled. I mean, they would just gone. And if I wasn't quick enough, I didn't get one. So I noticed him. We were at a restaurant probably 3 months after this conversation. And we walked in, they were there. We chatted with them for a few minutes. And as we're walking out, Linda looked at me and says, does he look heavier to you? And I said, NCIS and chocolate chip cookies. And it's but man, they were good cookies. Anyway, I saw him not long ago. He's seen 240 episodes already. And his wife just says, unbelievable. She said it's part of his DNA right now. And she said, whenever he's done with it, then we'll figure out what's next. And I said, okay.
So interesting. So let's get to the book itself. So first question is, and you mentioned them a moment ago, but to tee it up for you for this segment, what are the 3 Ps that will keep people young that you mentioned in the book?
Okay. Purpose, passion, and a plan. And for me, purpose was what you do for other people. So I look at purpose and I see, okay, I'm helping this, I'm helping them. I think that's critical. Passion's what you do for yourself. And plan is you got to have one, because you can have everything going on, but if you don't have a plan how you're going to execute them, it doesn't go anywhere. So I really took a lot of time. My son and I wrote the book, and we spent a lot of time creating some kind of a way for people to figure out their purpose, their passion, and their own plan. And we really give them a pretty good system on how to work through that and to really come to grips with their own life and what really makes them happy and gives them purpose in life, and a place to go and a reason to get up in the morning and take a shower, and a schedule. I think that just is so critical. If you think about it, we spend so much time working and so little time not working, that having so much time not working is really problematic if you don't spend the time figuring it out.
So so let's say I'm on the cusp of retirement and I say, Gary, I appreciate the input, but I've been busting my butt for the last 40 years. I just want to sit and relax and wake up and not have anything to do for the first time ever, or the first time in the last 40 years. How do you acknowledge and empathize with that feeling while also sharing with them, hey, I hear you, but that is only going to fulfill you for a handful of days. Like, how do you push politely?
Well, I've had to deal with this a lot. And I asked them, I said, so when you're in vacation, do you ever get bored? And they look at me and said, what do you mean? I said, well, at the end of the vacation, do you feel like you got to go back to work? You want to go back? Well, I don't want to go back to work, but I want to do something. I said, okay, that's what I was after. So what I really try and get them to do is, I'm fine with them taking downtime, and they can take all the downtime they want. But I said, the downtime's okay, but you need uptime. And you better figure out what you're going to do in your uptime, because you're going to get very, very bored and maybe even depressed. Start doing things you never used to do because you don't have your time filled. I said, so you need to really reach out and think through where you are. And I really try and stress that with them, David, because it's critical. If they don't do that, it's going to be a problem for sure.
So when you come across prospects or clients, I would imagine you uh, give them a copy of their book if they're kind of on the cusp of retirement, and try to help sort of get the point across. What's the common feedback that you hear from folks that maybe don't necessarily believe or agree with you on the front end, and then all of a sudden spend the time to read it? Like, what's the common feedback that you get after that? Is there a transformation? What does that look like?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, I make them buy the book for $15. And the reason I do that is I realized how many books I've had been given to me that I never read. And I said, listen, you're going to give me $15 and my son gets half the profit. So you're helping my son. And that's nice of you. But realistically, if you pay me $15, you'll read my book. And if you don't, you won't. I was, oh, I promise I'll read it. I said, no, you won't. I said, I have 100 of them on the shelf. You give me $15. So they give me $15, which is fine. And then I say, okay, get back to me with questions or whatever. So I'll give you a wonderful example. I had an attorney. We were friendly, but not friends. And he bought my book off Amazon. I had no idea he had it. He called me one day and says, Gary, I want to buy you lunch. And I said, Joe, that's great. Why? And he said, well, I read your book. I got a bunch of questions and I just want to take some of your time and answer these questions. Would you help me? And I said, I'd be glad to. So we go and have lunch. We probably spend an hour and 15 hour and 20 minutes going through everything. And he had really copious notes. I mean, he was detailed, very, very analytical. And so we went through all his notes, answered all his questions, and we're done with lunch. And he said, how much do I owe you? And I said, nothing. I said, you bought the book and you bought me lunch. We're good. He said, Gary, I took an hour. I said, we're good, Joe. I said, good luck. Let me know if you need some help. And I didn't really hear from him. About a month and a half later, he calls me and says, Gary, I have a problem. I said, sure. What is it, Joe? And he said, well, I've been trying to explain this to my wife. It isn't going over well. Can I have you sit down with my wife and myself and explain it? And I said, okay. I had never done that before. Caught me off guard. But I said, sure. So I'm in the conference room with him and his wife, and we're going through all the different things. And at the end of the meeting, she looked at me and she said, so if I have this right, if I make him retire full time right now, he's going to die. And I said, yes, he has nothing to do. He has no plan, and he has no idea what his purpose and passion are. I said, you need to give him time to figure this out. And she said, okay, I agree to that. She was younger. She wanted to travel, do all these things, and he wasn't prepared. And I said, yes, that has to really happen if you want to have your husband still alive. I said, because he's not going to make this. And I mean, he's sitting in the room, but I was just being candid and honest. And I really believe what I said. And she said, okay, I agree. So the meeting ends. He's thrilled because he doesn't have to quit full time, which he was really scared about. And he gets up, he reaches in his pocket and he hands me an envelope. And I said, what is this? I said, Joe, I told you I don't want any fees, nothing. He said, open the envelope. I opened the envelope, and inside it's his 401k with about $3 million in it. And he said, I want you to manage this. I'll be back next week. Tell me what you want to do with $3 million. I need an income, and I want you to help me do that. And I was blown away because not once in our 3 hours of meetings did money ever come up in the conversation, nor does it come up in the book. This book is not about money. It's about how do you figure out the rest of your life. And what I've found is when I help people figure out the rest of their life, they just want to give me their money and trust me to help them figure out their money side too.
I have a question that may stir the pot as well. To a previous comment that I made where you used that response, but what would you say if his wife said something like, well, Gary, shouldn't his passion and his purpose be me and in our relationship? How do you respond to something like that? Because from my understanding in the short amount of time that I've had on this earth, is that and I'm being general here, and this may ruffle some feathers, but generally speaking, for women, their purpose is to raise a family, and take care of kids, and they thrive off of that. And certainly there's exceptions to that quote unquote rule, so to speak. But then men, they derive their purpose from providing for the family and their work. So, and I love to work, but I also love my wife. So how would you, with all that in mind, respond to something like that if you came across that?
Well, I have, and yeah, I've actually had that broached to me, and I said, huh, interesting question. And then I turned to her and I said, well, that would assume that you guys get along great all the time. And she started laughing. She said, well, that's not true. And I said, then why in the world would you want to spend all your time and have nothing to talk about if it's just the two of you? I said, the beauty of being two different people doing different things is you get to communicate, hey, this is what I did today. What did you do? And you lose all that if the two of you are glued together. That's why I give people credit who work with their spouse and do that. And then they go home at night. I do not know how those people manage. My wife and I, a funny story. So she helped edit the first book, If Your Money Talked with Secrets Would It Tell. And then the second book she worked on, called The American Dream Revisited, then she fired me in the middle of the book. She said, Gary, it is very clear we cannot work together because the way you think and the way I think are so different. Meantime, we've been married 47 years. And she said, we are so different that I'm probably going to kill you. And I said, okay, well, that's bad. So the new book, the third one, How to Retire and Not Die, she worked with my son. She kept me out of it 100%. I never saw an edit. I never saw anything because she could work with Max. She just couldn't work with me. So my answer to people is I tell them that story and they said, oh, yeah, I could relate to that. So most people realize that, married, just like you said, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but not, yeah, that whole idea, you get together too much and it gets pretty stale or pretty tough. So that's my answer. And they mostly understand. They say, yeah, that would probably fit us. And I asked one of them, I said, so when you go on a 2-week vacation, how does that go? And they said, well, really good for 10 days. Okay.
Really, really good for 10 days. And then the airport trip to and from, it was funny. I'll tell you this story. I thought it was funny. My wife, when we were on a trip, we were at the airport and I went to order a sandwich and I was like, what would you like? She's like, oh no, I'll just have a bite of yours. And I was like, no, I'll get you, your own sandwich. And she's like, no, I just want a bite of yours. And I was like, I'd rather you take a bite of your sandwich and throw the rest of it out than have a bite of my. I'm hungry. So it sort of resulted in, let's call it a fight with finger quotes.
Yeah.
A great way to start the trip. But then I thought it would be funny, which I quickly learned it was not funny, although I still think it's funny. We were sitting there and I was like, I'll be right back. So I go to the convenience store at the airport. I grab a Snickers bar. And if and if you've seen the commercials, which based on your reaction you have, I put the Snickers bar down on the table and said, babe, you're not yourself. You're not yourself when you're hungry. Have a Snickers. And let's just say that in that moment, I was the only one who thought that was funny.
Yeah, I'm sure that landed about as rough as you'd ever want a landing.
Oh man, but no, we joke about it now, but no, that it's it's true that you put it well where if you spent 100% of your time together, what would you talk about? You already know everything that's going on with each other's life because you're sitting right next to them. So then you find yourself, complaining about what you're watching on TV or the news and commiserating together as opposed to speaking about the impact that you're having on the other people that you're interacting with and the social circles that you're in and all that. So I can certainly see that.
It makes sense to have time separate because it just, it creates excitement and something to talk about and something to do. And, Linda and I go to dinner sometimes and we'll sit and talk the entire dinner, and which is cool. Something's going on in her life that I wasn't aware of, or something's in my life. And we'll have these really engaging conversations, which is really fun. And then sometimes you go to dinner and there's not much going on because, there's just nothing happening. And I thought, wow, if we were together all the time, there would never be anything happening.
Right.
Yeah, big difference.
Well, walk me through, if I'm not mistaken, around December-ish, the book is actually being turned into a masterclass.
Yes.
What's that all about?
Well, we kept getting so much feedback on the book. We've sold 10,000 copies so far, which I'm very proud of, considering no one knows who I am and I live in Canton, Ohio. So that's kind of cool. And but we sold 10,000 copies around the world. We're in a bunch of different countries, blows me away. And what we're finding is people they wanted more and they kept asking for more and more and more. And so I told Max, I said, Max, we probably need to spend some time in a studio, record this program, and figure out if we can't give them more help. How to create your own wish list, how to figure out, the fact that you should do a wish list and your spouse should do a wish list. Things I never thought about in a million years when I wrote the book, or Max and I wrote it. And all of a sudden we get all these ideas. And I said, those are really good ideas. So what we ended up doing is we spent 10 hours in the studio and we filmed it, and it's being edited down, and it's really editing a 3-hour and 42-minute movie, which is a very long movie. But what we tried to do is we have all these segments, modules, we call them, and each module has a point and there's an exercise that you must do. And what you're really doing is building your future. And so that's what we did with it. And I'm excited about it, David, because I just think it could impact so many people in retirement. I've got some corporations that are very interested. There's a hospital that has expressed interest for all their employees that retire because no one has this figured out. And I mean, maybe a few people do. Maybe 5 out of 100 really have a game plan. But 95 of them are kind of, yeah, we'll see what happens. I'm going to play golf. Well, that doesn't work. I'm going to do this. That's okay. But what they find out is what they want to do works a little bit, but not for the full time. So the master class was our ability to really put um, visual markers on what you need to do in our conversation going back and forth and how we related to why those stories made sense.
Well, what I think's cool about it too is you're also sort of meeting people where they're at. And what I mean by that is some people like to read is how they consume information. Other people like to watch and they're more likely to watch a video. So it's, you know, meeting people where they're at and increasing the likelihood that they get the value from the principles that you discuss in the book and now ultimately the masterclass as well. So I really like that you're doing it in an additional format and driving home the, hey, you can know about this stuff, but here are the actions you need to take to live this way. Keyword live as opposed to die that way.
Yes. Very big on living. Yeah. And that's really why we did it. And it's been really exciting, slow. I never realized how long it took to edit something. I mean, I was clueless. But the coloring, the music, the timing, and the interactions and what camera angles, all that stuff, I go to a movie and say, whoa, this is really good. I have no idea how they put it together and I never thought about it. Now I'm actually watching it and thinking, whoa, this is really hard. And how important editing is and how important it is all these things fit in the right way. It's been a heck of an education for me.
Well, Gary, before we wrap up, first of all, this has been great. One of the questions that I ask all of our guests is a book, besides yours, of course, that has had an impact on them. And the book that we had connected on that you've read no less than 10 times, you mentioned, is Think and Grow Rich, which is an annual read or listen, because I have the audiobook as well. Think and Grow Rich. Why did you choose that book and what's the impact that it's had on you?
Well, the impact's been huge. And I chose that book a long time ago. Oh my gosh, probably 30 years ago in my career. I was talking to a friend of mine and we're in the same company. So we had a relationship and I asked him what he was reading and he said, oh, I just read this great book by Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. I said, I don't know anything about it. He said, hold on. He gave me his copy. And I read the book on the plane going home, started reading it. And it was like, that book was written for me. It was just so, it just really touched something inside. And I thought, wow, this is really powerful. And then I read it again. And what I realized is every time I read that book, I find something new that I didn't really discover the first time. And I was really impressed with how that man turned something with all these amazingly famous and wealthy people, how that resonated, where they came from. They didn't start out famous and wealthy. And I also like how he explained things. I've listened to his audio a few times and he's entertaining in his own way. His storytelling is excellent. And I just really was intrigued by it and it became my staple. So I had a deal where I read that book every year, at the beginning of the year, every single year. And then I stopped doing that. Now I listen to the audio or whatever, but easy 10 times I've read the book. I don't know how many times the audio, but and ever if I get a little bit down or a little funky, I can pull that book up and start listening to it. It changes my mindset.
Just like that. I was pulling it up because I was forgetting the name of it. But I've listened to this book at least two, maybe three times. Have you read or listened to Napoleon Hill's book, Outwitting the Devil?
No, I don't even know that book. Outwitting the Devil. Okay, that's written
Listen,
down. Yeah.
Gary, please scoop that up. It's a conversation slash interview with the quote unquote devil.
Okay.
It is so eye-opening and so complimentary to Think and Grow Rich. So if if Think and Grow Rich is about what you should be doing and how you should be living your life, if we kind of categorize it and summarize it like that, um, Outwitting the Devil is the quote unquote devil himself sharing with Napoleon Hill why he does what he does to get people to not do certain things or to do certain things that work against them. And those two books, juxtaposed against each other, are it's really well-rounded. Reading those things in tandem or back to back.
Well, your timing is impeccable because last night I finished a book and I didn't have anything on my library.
There we go.
Now I got one. Huh. Okay. Yeah, I will look that up tonight for sure and download it. That's cool. And it's so funny because I was thinking and I had a bunch of stuff in my queue and I look and I thought, nah. And nothing was like really getting me excited. This gets me excited.
You'll love this book.
Okay. Yeah,
so
sure.
So How to Retire and Not Die, the 3 Ps that will keep you young, with you and your son Max as the authors. Where can they find this book? Where can they keep up on your journey? How can they stay in touch so that they can see what you have in the works from here?
They go to my, if they go to How to Retire and Not Die, or go to GarySirak.com, which is the easiest, and they want to buy a book direct off there, I'll sign it and personalize it for them. Done a lot of those. Or they can go to Amazon or any of the book sites have it, and it's everywhere. And that's been good. And the audio book, my son recorded the audio book, which is quite good. He did a great job of handling that. I didn't want anything to do with it, David. And he said, I'll do this. And then he found out how hard it was. He said, well, I should have maybe kept my mouth shut. But anyway, it's pretty good. And it came out nice. I listened to that not long ago and I said, man, that was really, really well done. So yeah, it's been a whole lot of fun. And also getting to work with my son was pretty special.
Love it. Well, Gary, this was an absolute pleasure. Joe Jordan, if you are listening to this, we appreciate the introduction. But Gary, thank you for joining. And I'm excited to see how the book progresses into the masterclass and beyond. So I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. What a wonderful way to spend an afternoon. Kind of brightened up my day.
There you go. All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.